Hi. I'm just going to wait for a few people to join us and for Bri to join us so that we can see inside our studio and talk to her today. Um, there she is. Hi, Bri. Okay, now I have to remember how to add her. Ah, that was, oh, that worked. Hi,
Okay.
Bri.
Can you see me? I feel like
No.
okay, hold on. Let me see if oh, you know what? Do I have to turn my video? There we go. That's what it is.
There you
There we
go. I
go.
see you.
You get my computer screen and my phone's leaning up against, so it just looks gray.
Okay. Oh, that's funny. Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you? It's so great to see your face.
Yeah, I know. We've only like talked just on every platform that there is, I think,
Yeah,
emailing and Instagramming. So yeah, it's really good to see you.
nice to meet you.
Um, so how is it sunny in Concord today?
It's beautiful. Yeah, it feels like fall, and it's just like a really lovely windows open kind of day.
That's
So it was
perfect.
like cold this morning, sweater weather.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the same. I'm in upstate New York. It was the same thing. It's like it feels like fall and looks like summer. So I'm happy. It
Hmm.
feels great.
I'm okay with
Okay,
that.
so for all the people that just joined us, I'm Christine. I'm with Sorrel Gallery. We're talking to Bri today. So Bri is based in New Hampshire. You're actually my parents live in Concord too. So every time
Oh,
so it's like, yeah. So I'm there every once in a while. Maybe I'll see you out and about sometime.
oh my
Um,
God.
so we're gonna start with a studio tour, and then we're gonna just jump right into all the questions that I have for Bri. Actually, like I've wanted to talk to you for so long, so I'm really excited about today. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to pop them into the comments, and I will do my best. I have a lot of questions for Bri, but I will do my best to weave them in as we can. So if you want to just get started, Bri, I will let you take the wheel and show us around your space. I'm really excited to see what you've got going on in there.
Sure. I mean, I could stand in a circle and give it to you.
That
I'll
works.
do the whole thing. Here, I'll start. So I'm above the garage, so these are kind of the stairs that I come up, and then you'd go into the house that way. So I'm at home in my studio,
Nice.
literally. And so this had been a like an office space. There was like green carpet and this like terrible beige on the walls when we moved in, like really bad track lighting. And so like we've been in the house for a year and have kind of upgraded this space. And you'll see like we have this half wall here, and that was not there before. It was just it's tough with these slanted ceilings because there's not a lot of like wall space to paint on, and I love being able to kind of hang things and photograph that way. So that's new as well. So um yeah, I'll kind of like walk you through all my little like areas. I feel like this space is really flexible. Most things are on wheels, and um, when people come in here, they're like, "Oh, I thought it was so much bigger than it looks in pictures." Often, so things have to be really flexible. I've got like all of my junk, not junk, but like flat stuff that I can squeeze in here to just like this space. So it's not the most beautiful flat file, but it works really well because it's easy to access. Um, Also, Christine, stop me if you like have any questions and you want me to slow down
Yes,
too.
I will. No, so far
Okay.
this is great. And I love that
Okay.
everything's on wheels. That's my favorite part so far. But
Yeah,
yeah,
this
I
is
will
like
definitely stop you.
this table is kind of my favorite thing that's on wheels. So we found this on Facebook Marketplace, and it was an old like workbench in somebody's barn.
Oh, so cool.
And we put these like giant casters on it so that I can roll it out and frame and like work on all sides of it. And for shipping, that works really well. And it also makes it counter height being on casters. So like anything that can be on wheels is on wheels. So that becomes a really flexible space. And then this is just, as much storage as I can pack in here. So like smaller canvases and art books. And then behind this wall is where I can, like, I have a lot of painting storage. Let me see if I can back up and we go. So this painting rack is like another one of my favorite things. It's also on wheels. And my husband actually, when we met and moved in together, and then I like went and studied abroad. So we were in college when we met, and we moved in, and like the week later, I left to study abroad and had all of my student paintings and was just like, here you go. And I came home and he had built this storage rack for me.
Oh, that's so sweet.
And so it's like it came with us to the new house. It like collapses, and so any artist will tell you storage is really important. And so this is my kind of corner when whatever can't be hung on walls.
Right. And you used that little wall really well. Sorry, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but that's perfect.
Don't you love it? So this is a new project. I made these like little nubs that I can hang things on, and they're pretty flexible because I could do a bigger painting too, as long as it wasn't taller than the wall. But we're all about maximizing space here.
Yeah, can tell.
And then this is kind of when I'm in the studio, my painting setup, and so I've got my like rolling table, storage cart, and the easel's really flexible and movable too. And that moves around depending on if I'm working from another painting, I may have it facing this wall, or if I'm working from a photo, like I'll use my big monitor. And so that's able to move around quite a bit as well. Let's see. And then this is also, it's a big mess, but this is where I can throw everything.
Yeah. But like, that's an amazing little, I wasn't expecting that. That's got so much in it. Oh my God, I love it.
The like packing materials and like extra paint or like mediums I'm not working with actively. And then there's like a little door behind here, and that's where I any frames that aren't really large, I can actually fit them in there and store them if I don't need them right away. So it's pretty good. I have, for the size of the space, I have a lot of storage.
Right.
So,
and these ones that are on the wall, are those just flat on paper?
Yeah, so these are Slash, which is like a vinyl paint. This is the paint that I'm working with on these in the studio, and it's on a Yupo paper. So it's like very thick, and it doesn't curl. And it's really smooth. So there's no texture to it at all.
Wow, that's nice.
But
and with those, that's something that you would end up like just framing it like under glass or something, or do you like just leave them unframed, or what are they destined for? Is my question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So this is a new thing for me. This is a new medium this year, and most of my work is on canvas. And so when I started these, I knew that I was going to have to figure out my framing plan. And the plan in my head is to use FrameBridge basically and do like a floated, no matte frame with glass. So it would definitely have to be behind glass. But I love like the edges. And so I don't want to put them under a mat and get rid of that. Like I want to have all of that drippy, rough goodness in there. So that's the plan right now.
Nice. Yeah. Those are really neat. I kind of stuck out to me because I've only seen your work on canvas, I think. But I love them. Like flat. I think they're lovely under in a frame with glass. So okay. Awesome. So I feel like you could do a blog you could like have an entire blog just about storage spaces and storage in small spaces and like mobile furniture. And I feel like you really like got that figured. That is just figured out for you. So I'm a big like organization and storage person. So it was like a real treat for me.
You watch it because that is my kitchen. Yeah, I love that stuff. So
yeah,
really,
I bought a kitchen island and it's on wheels, and I'm like, this is great. This is the best. So, okay. So I'm going to jump right into questions then. And like I said to anybody listening, please feel free to pop any questions in the comments. I will do my best to see them and pose them to Bri. So first of all, just really simple. Where are you from originally? Where are you located now? Just anything just to kind of about you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. So I grew up in like southeastern New Hampshire, town called Hampstead. It's not very big, but it's about 45 minutes north of Boston, and about a half hour from the seacoast, from the New Hampshire seacoast. And after that, I ended up going to school at UNH, and that is, you know, closer to the seacoast area. And then I lived there for 10 years. And then we just recently relocated to Concord last year. So
Okay, cool.
all New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But New Hampshire's beautiful, so that's lovely. It's a good state.
It's not bad. Yeah. And we also have so much access to Maine, and like I'm like kind of, I feel like a Mainer at heart a little bit because I've spent so much time there. And then my dad grew up in Newburyport, Mass, and my mom in Saugus, Mass. So that like North Shore area. So we spent a lot of time there growing up too.
Gotcha. Full-blown New Englander. Okay, so we've seen your work now, just kind of in your studio, but do you want to just tell us a little bit about your artwork and your just style in general? What do you do in your words, I guess?
Yeah, I think it really boils down to, like, I love paint. I love the feeling of paint. And so I like to play with that feeling in my painting process. And that goes parallel to like this love of color and color theory. And so I am exploring when I am painting. And so whether it is from a photograph or most of my work is done plein air, that is the goal, is just to like be present in the moment and react to what I'm seeing and try and just allow myself to communicate that feeling really honestly without getting stuck in my head, and landing on something that feels somewhat interesting, you know what I mean? And so I am a representational painter in a way, right? Because I am recording what I'm seeing and I'm feeling, but they're definitely more expressive than like a realist painting. And so things get boiled down into shape and mark and color. And I get really excited about surprising color relationships, or, you know, when a painting really does communicate a feeling that I had in a place. And it doesn't always happen, you know, sometimes they flop. And so when it does, it feels really special.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. And how did you get started? Like as an artist, like when did this start? Where did it come from?
I was always a creative kid, and I think some artists did have that and some didn't, but that was where I always felt the most myself, when I was making something. And then, you know, people start calling you the art kid, and so that becomes part of your identity. And when I started applying to schools and trying to figure out what I was going to do, I think there was this feeling that I had to figure something out that was going to be stable. And like, people aren't artists. Like, I didn't have artists in my life that I looked at or that I knew. Like, I didn't really know that was an option. And so I was applying to a lot of schools for interior design and fashion and like these creative things that were applied arts, where, you know, like there feels like there's a use to it. And you know, I would rally against that at this point. Anybody that's thinking about being an artist, if that's what you're feeling called to do it, because you're probably going to end up there anyway. So I ended up actually landing in a fine art program because it was UNH, which was our state school, and financially it made the most sense. And my friends were going to UNH, so all the 18-year-old decision making came into play there.
Yeah.
And when I graduated, I ended up working in some administrative positions, and I ended up getting my master's in teaching because I was like, well, teaching is, I'll still be doing art, but it'll be stable. And then the pandemic happened and I was just not loving it. Like, it's not what I was good at it, but it wasn't what I wanted to be doing. And I wanted to be painting. And so that's how I found myself here.
Um, so two things I just want to respond to. Number one, I agree with you. I think this is like really good. If there are any artists listening, or who listen after we're done here today, I think it's really good to hear that story that you feel at a young age, like, or at any age really, like it has to be applied. I love that word that you use, like, applied arts. It has to be something that's useful, but it's really nice to hear that story of like, I still ended up back here anyway, and I'm doing it and I'm loving it. And it's actually something I'm passionate about, which is actually the key. And what was the other thing I wanted to comment on? Oh my gosh, it just dropped out of my head. Maybe it'll come back to me. But that was one thing that I really wanted to. I totally agree with you. I think that's, oh, I remember what the other thing was, the pandemic. There's so many artists who said the pandemic was what 2020 was, that year that just got me going and it got me working. And suddenly I was able to like do this on my own. So there are silver linings to things. And I think, yeah, I've heard that more than once. So that's really
Yeah.
interesting. Cool. Um, so this is something I really wanted to talk to you about. Can you walk us through your artistic process, and tell us how you create either just an individual piece or a series, from start to finish? Just like, what does that look like for you?
Sure. Most of my paintings, like if I'm talking about my plein air painting, it's one sitting. And so everything is really condensed and fast. They're one-shot paintings. And, sometimes I come back if they're a little bit bigger or they don't, work out the way I want. Sometimes I'll try attacking them in the studio. But for the most part, it is like figure out where I want to paint. And that sometimes is like the hardest part of the process right now. But, going out, sometimes hiking to where I'm going, setting everything up, like my plein air easel. And then I start right into the canvas usually is my process. And that is with like a really thin layer of oil. I use terpenoid, which is like a less severe solvent. And just thin down my first layer, which is usually a really warm color if I'm working in the landscape, because it is a contrast to what it's going to end up being in these like greens and blues. And so I do a lot of drawing in the first like hour or so of just figuring out the composition and figuring out my lights and darks and where that's going to be. And sometimes in doing that, I will decide that, oh, this isn't working, and I'll switch to my spy or something like that. But I work out a lot of those problems and that like, yeah, those hard things at that very first phase. And then I go into color mixing. And so I'll mix a really wide palette to begin with and try and get like a really good range of values. So I'm got my lightest and my darkest and a lot of in-betweens that I am just doing based on what's on my palette and what I'm looking at without actually putting them on the canvas. And so the mixing happens. And then I go through, and this is like my first layer of paint that goes on. And I'm really focusing on like bringing out the bigger shapes in the painting, divided by like those values, and getting those all down. And once you get them down on the canvas, you realize that the color looks a lot different when they're up against other colors because they're relative to each other. And then I go back to the mixing phase and just keep laying them down and shifting things until it gets to the place that I want it to. And that's kind of the nice thing about working in oils is there's like a lot of scraping, and it's really a physical process, and like that history builds up in the paint and on the canvas. And it really, like, the painting gets better for it when there's some confusion and like trial and error, and you're working up that surface. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's really interesting. So I just want to quickly ask you, you said, I found it really interesting that you said you usually start with warm colors as your sort of your thin base layer, because you know that it's likely going to end up just in this like blue green. And you know, obviously
Mhm.
you work on the coast, you work in maybe northeast, even if you're in the mountain, you're northeast, so you do end up in nature kind of with a lot of green and blue. I'm wondering if you've ever sought out a warmer scape to look at because
Yeah.
you know, like, because you have that. Usually it's a cool palette, like the end result is usually going to be green. I mean, do you ever say like, no, tonight I'm going out and I'm going to watch for the sunset because I don't want to do that green
Mhm.
and blue? Or do you say
Yeah.
no, like that's the time and the place that I am looking for and that's kind of it?
No, you are so spot on. Like sometimes it gets boring, right? And so the need to mix things up. And a lot of the times, like in the winter, if I'm painting in the studio, if there's this like pink winter sky, I get really
Right.
excited. I'll snap a photo and bring it back into the studio. Here, hold on. I'm gonna grab it. So this is still like a cooler composition, but I went up into the mountains and there was this like orange water that was happening in these rocks. And like if there's an opportunity like that, I will grab onto it for
Yeah.
sure. Um,
Nice.
yeah, yeah. So yes, all the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Um, so what does an average, just an, and I understand that it's seasonal for you. So what does an average day look like for you? Um, I guess let's say when you are doing the plein air work, like
Mhm.
from morning to night, what does that actually, how does that flow for you?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I know you asked this in the written interview, and it was really hard because a lot of my days are so different, and
Yeah.
so
But that's
um,
lovely. That's really nice to have
it
different days.
I like it. And I am one that like if I set out a routine, I'll usually break that routine.
Yeah.
So I am not a person that like has a schedule and knows what always works for me because it depends on the day. But normally if I've got like a really good plein air painting day that I've got planned and I have the whole day, I'll wake up pretty early and if there's like emails to get done, I will like spend some time doing that. And then there's just like the packing up, which is really important because if I don't take the time to like make sure that I have everything, once you're out there, you know, you're kind of stuck with what you have. And so I just like will double check all of my supplies that like I have enough terp and that like my tubes aren't running out and that I don't need to replenish. Um, Prepare my surface if I need to for like my canvas, and then I will start my drive. And so a lot of this summer has actually been spent going up into Franconia Notch in the White Mountains. It's about equidistance going there versus going to the coast. And while we are in Concord, I've been feeling like, oh, I'll take advantage of being so close to that. And so it's about an hour drive. And so I get up there and I've been spending a lot of time at the basin, which is there, and the trails around the basin. It's this like very cool rock formation with this like big pool of water. And so that's been about like a 15-minute hike in. And then I do my setup and I paint until I get hungry. And then I will usually pack a lunch and I'll like have that to hold me over. And then I'll go until like mid to late afternoon and be home in time for dinner. So that's my routine. Usually by myself. I will paint with friends sometimes, but it usually goes the best when I'm alone.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a little more contemplative. You can be a little more reflective and kind of have the quiet the mental stimulation of having people around. Um, so did you always paint in plein air? And then I guess you've kind of answered this already, but I'll ask you again just to see if there's anything else you want to add. Like, what do you think that, number one, have you always painted in plein air or did that kind of evolve over time? And then number two, what do you think that actually adds to your work? And you did talk about this a little bit, I think, like just kind of in that, the fact that you're working kind of quickly and stuff like that. But if you wanted to, whether it's during the process, just for you as an artist or as the finished piece, do you think that what do you think that adds to it? Because I think we've
Yeah.
established it adds something, but what do you think it
Yeah.
adds?
Yeah. So when I was at UNH, actually was doing a lot of like self-portraiture work and figurative work because you're in the studio, you have a lot of like figures. So that's just kind of the headspace that I was in. But then when I was a junior, that's when I studied abroad in Ascoli-Piceno, Italy. And it was a 5.5-week summer program. We went as a group of artists from UNH with 2 UNH faculty members, and we stayed in this tiny little town in the Marche region, which is in like central eastern part of the country. And it was incredible. It was really I had done some landscape painting before, but it was my first experience with sustained, like repetitive landscape painting. And the light in Italy in the summer is just a different thing. It's amazing. And it's hard for it not to do something to you. And so I felt like I kind of found my own voice and a language that felt natural when I was there. And so coming back, I think there was some like, I'm only ever plein air painting ever again. And
and then you get back to New Hampshire and you're like, ooh.
Yeah, exactly. It's still where I feel like the most myself and where I enjoy the process the most. And because there is this struggle that automatically is like infused in the process because you're fighting against the weather and time to be out there and the materials that you have on hand, right? Like you don't have your whole studio there. And so that yields something different than being in the studio with a photograph, or, I think that can be aided by working from sketches and working from other paintings rather than just relying on a photo. But it's still never the same as like the shifting colors and the shifting light that you're going to get from being in plein air. And so I don't know if they're all necessarily better than my studio paintings, but I have I think a sweeter connection to them than my studio.
Right, you have the memory of being there. Yeah, absolutely. That stuff always shines through, I think, for sure.
I bet some people would argue they're not as good as the studio paintings, but I don't know.
But for you, they are. And no, like I definitely think the viewer can usually see if there was sort of like an experience that was being had by the artist, or if there is a special connection for the artist. You can tell when the artist is like, so yeah, maybe technically I know what you mean. Sometimes technically things just, you had more time or whatever, but definitely you can, that there's a little bit more of an an emotional component there. That is usually visible, I think. So would you say that the location locations maybe in Italy were the best places you've ever painted in plein air, or is there like a favorite you've had thus far?
Yeah, I think that it's really hard to beat.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's just different than painting here. And I have found places that I feel connected to and rooted in. And I usually, like in a season, I like to find a place that I go back to and paint over a long period of time, multiple days, to find a connection. And so one place that has really done that for me is Wagon Hill Farm, which is in Durham, New Hampshire. It's really close to UNH, and it's just this trail system with like these beautiful hills and like expansive skylines, and it was really easy to access. They had bathrooms, like porta potties, which is a really key thing.
Yeah.
And so like it was just easy to return to, and I like found something there. And so that would be like my home base favorite place to paint.
Right. So we did get a question submitted from Coach Sarah Claffin. I hope I'm saying that right. And she asked, and I thought this was a great follow-up question: what is your ideal dream location to paint? Have you made a plan to go there? So we know where your favorites are. Do you have one that you would dream of going to, and do you have any plans for making it there?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to go back to Italy, but besides that, I would really love to go to New Mexico, because it's such a vastly different landscape. And I think that, there's a lot of artist activity there because of like the skies, and there's a lot of history of the arts in New Mexico. And so I think that something happens when you put yourself in a place that is so foreign in terms of like the environment and the landscape to, right, like I have a visual language that I have figured out with evergreen trees and the atmosphere of the sky in New Hampshire. And so, and like what grass look, you know what I mean? Like I have language and I have a color palette, and to be transported somewhere where I have to refigure all of that out, that's on my list. So
That's,
hopefully.
and how funny is it that, like, we were just talking about how you usually have to do the, not half, you're usually confronted with blues and greens, and that's that landscape would be the opposite. You would get all those warm colors, and you'd be forced to basically work inverse from what you're used to. So how funny that would be your, that, I love that. If you ever make it there, I'm really excited to see what you do.
We like reflect back on this conversation, and I'll be like, I told you.
That's so funny. So what is the most rewarding and then the most challenging part of your creative process, would you say?
The most rewarding part, I think, being in the process and like finding that flow state is really important. And I think it's why I continue coming back to it, right? I think without that, it wouldn't be as appealing for me as a painter. But there's also the reward of like taking a finished painting and like sticking it in a frame. And that is, you know, I'm not going to discount that feeling of like a really beautifully finished product either.
Right.
So both of those things. And then challenging, I think that just remembering to trust myself and my own instincts and not getting caught up in, you know, like, oh, I need to do this for this person, and like, oh, but like this might sell better, or this, you know, like what somebody else is doing, somebody that I really admire, and just coming constantly back to like, I see this color and I'm going to put it on the canvas, and just like getting into that like really intimate place of playing with paint and translating the landscape that I came to the process for. And so it's easy to get caught up in the other things and second guess yourself and like, oh, you know, I don't paint as well, or you know, the imposter syndrome and the self-doubt comes out for sure. And so just always coming back to like, that's not as important to me as just like being present with it.
Right. We just had one question. Do you have any favorite mark making tools?
I work with like very limited. Usually I have like one or two brushes in my hand plus my palette knife. So I work a lot with a palette knife, and especially once I start getting a lot of paint on the surface, there's like a lot of scraping and carving in. The earlier layers are really what's happening with the brush, and I work back and forth with both. So like a lot of the times I'll get like, do you work with a brush or a palette knife? And it is very much both, and you can find both of those marks in there.
Yeah, your work is so well, not all of it, I think, but a lot of it is very textured, and that it gives it so much personality to have that palette knife. It's like, because I think, you know, a lot of the landscapes you paint are very lush. Like you're out there, like whether it's like a marsh or a coast, like everything feels really like the clouds feel fluffy and the foliage feels really thick and all of these things. And so when you actually, you like emulate that with the paint, and that palette knife is so, it just gives it that, like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, it's like a tangible way of like experiencing the energy that you experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And it's not intentional. Like, I think that it's not like, it's my own temperament with the paint. It's not like, oh, I want this texture. Like, I never come at it really consciously with that. But in an area that I'm like working up and reworking, there's just naturally more paint on it. So like the complexity of trees, right? Like you're saying, the lushness, that's probably going to have more paint because of my process versus like a sky or water that maybe takes less mark to figure out.
Sure.
So that's interesting to think about for sure.
Yeah. Um, so from your first painting to your most recent painting, how would you say you've grown?
Yeah.
And I know you said at the beginning you were kind of doing like figurative because you were in school, but I mean, your first painting could be like when you were like 6. So I don't know
Yeah,
when that happened.
yeah, I would go back to, I mean, like always like watercolor and like kids painting, but like thinking about my very first painting class was in high school. We had an oil painting class, and my teacher, I'm still in touch with him, but he is like a hyper realist, like make things more beautiful than they are in real life, like paint the dewdrops. And that was his way of coming at things. And so, and I think when you're first getting into art, it's really natural to be like, it's easy to latch onto that idea that like the gold standard is to make something look really real, like a photorealism. And that's what I was chasing, I think, at first. And so to go into art school where they're just trying to get us to loosen up, like that is really the first mission that it felt like was just like relax a little bit. And then allowing us to figure out what our natural tendencies were and like how our wrists moved and figure out our own voice. And so I've gone in a very opposite direction of like whatever happens, happens on the canvas, right? Like it's just about reacting and responding. And so that mentality shift, I can appreciate that photorealism so much. I think that there are people that love that like fine detail. I don't have the patience for it, and it's not like I'm not interested in that, and I don't think that it would be able to hold my attention now.
Right. Well, yeah, I when I was doing art in high school, I was the exact same way. I did my favorite things were one shots, and I didn't like the details. I was like, so you're speaking my language here. But I think also there is something to be said for the hyper realism stuff, but the stuff that I think when I look at like a painting that you make, I see something different than I would have seen looking at that space on my own. It's a space I know well. I live in the Northeast, you know, or I've seen the coast, I've seen mountains, but you're presenting something to the viewer that they wouldn't have ever seen really. You know what I mean? So I think it does something very different, but I tend to agree with you that loosening up ends up making something that's actually someone would never have seen before, and that kind of gives it its own personality and its own kind of something to offer to the person looking at it. So and that's how I feel when I look at your work. So okay, broader view, this is kind of the last, oh no, two questions. If you could give one piece of advice to yourself as a younger artist, what would it be?
Yeah, that going back to like trust yourself,
Yeah.
that, you know, your perspective matters in terms of like, don't wait till you feel like you're better or you're like you've got something figured out. Like just make the work. And, you know, because in doing that, you learn so much. And in, you know, weird, I now too, like art that I look at, like I love weird art. I love weird paintings. And right, like I wanted to hold my attention. And so that those things wouldn't happen if people aren't like trusting that weirdness in themselves a little bit. And so that's
so true.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, and so lastly, what is your, before we get into a couple just like this or that questions, what is your goal as an artist?
Yeah. I think that, you know, there are a lot of day-to-day goals and like achievement goals, but I think like my biggest, broadest goal is just to have this practice be really sustainable. Like I want to always do this. And so giving myself permission to be flexible and adapt and change things. And, you know, maybe in 10 years, I won't be landscape painting. Maybe I'll be doing something else, even though right now that feels so integral to me. But I think just like knowing that it's okay to change things and shift. And so just that's my main goal, is just like whatever I have to do to keep this sustainable and like maintain my interest. That's the big goal.
Very cool. Okay, so just to wrap up, I have a couple of this or that questions.
Okay.
Um, tea or coffee?
Both.
All right.
Oh, coffee in the morning and tea before bed, like
Tea before bed. Okay.
herbal.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I was thinking like maybe like an afternoon pick me up, but all right.
Yeah,
So you're a sleepy time tea kind of
yes,
person.
exactly.
All right. Morning person or night owl?
Usually a morning person. I sleep. Like I love to sleep. I'm a great sleeper, and so I will sleep from 10 to 8, and
Yeah.
so neither.
Yeah. So you're really refreshed when you wake up. So
I really am. Yeah, exactly.
good.
Mm-hmm.
That's lovely. Books or movies?
Mm. Books more. I can't stay up for a full movie. So like I have this joke that I've seen the first half of a lot of movies.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
books for sure.
All right. Um, so mountains or beach? And I guess this would be a question less for working, but more for just you personally, just for a day.
Like if I could go on vacation to the mountains or the beach, I would go to the beach.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I don't remember what I said when you first
Do you have a different answer for working?
Yeah, I would go to the mountains. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's really interesting. All right. So
Yeah.
so mountains for work and beach for pleasure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Cake or pie?
Cake.
Okay, and lastly, what is your favorite place on earth?
Acadia National Park right now, but I bet if you like asked me in a couple weeks, it would be different. I'm like crazy going there. I haven't actually painted there. Actually, I've done like one small study, but it's usually like vacation when we go. But it just feels so Maine, and it's like 5 hours from me where I am, and it's just what I love how I feel when I'm there, and it's expansive, and it's the woods and the ocean and the mountains and the ocean. So yeah.
All right, I have one last question that just popped into my head, just out of curiosity, because we've been talking almost 45 minutes now, and this has been fantastic. I feel like I learned so much. But I do have a question, because I think I saw a dog crate in your studio.
Oh, yeah.
I've read your bio, so I do think you have a dog. I'm forgetting the name now. Is it
Vinny?
Vinny, okay, I got it. Does Vinny come with you when you paint in plein? No.
No. He doesn't sit still very well. He's kind of like me. So yeah, he can't handle it. Like sometimes when I was working full time and like painting on the side, and when I would be like painting on the weekend with, when we were doing family things. And so my husband, Brian, would bring Vinny, and like they would hike and do things, and I would paint. But these days when he stays here, and he's 10. He's 10, so he's really happy to just like snooze most of the day.
That's funny. I love that. Okay, so that's all the questions I have for you. And this was fantastic. I loved seeing inside your studio, and I loved getting to learn a little bit more about all your work. Because obviously I've seen it, but it just like it changes. It always, whenever I talk to artists about their work, my perspective on it totally changes. So this was fantastic. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Christine. I really appreciate it.
I hope everybody who has been listening or still is listening is able to go over to our website. You can go to the link in our bio and check out all of Bri's work. She has paintings available. She has prints. All of our prints are customizable, so you can choose your size. So we have a lot to offer from Bri, and I hope everybody has a great rest of your, what today is it? Today, Friday?
Friday.
It's Friday. We're wrapping up in the best way. So have a great weekend, Bri.
Thank you. You too.
And thank you so much. And I'll hopefully talk to you soon.
All right. Sounds good. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you so much.